let's think about that one, and then realize that we haven't addressed the cyclical nature of isolation and solitary confinement. A perfectly balanced individual goes into solitary, and within 30 days is probably beginning to show signs of mental stress. Imagine where you'd be after 18 months. Some of us can't stand to be alone with ourselves for more than 10 minutes. Policy changes have led to almost idealistic goals for reentry. We hear about THU, the Transitional Housing Unit, the paradigm now of reentry coordination that is going to begin upon intake at Camp Hill or Muncie for the females. In reality, these are more form than substance, and preparing an inmate for release doesn't mean much if the inmate has nowhere to go and no way to find a place to live when he gets out. And this is best illustrated by the population I deal with the most. I have the distinction of dealing with the offenders people don't want to talk about. I chair the policy subcommittee for sex offenders. And talk about blocks to reentry, they probably set the standard. In a recent meeting with two members of the parole board, the prison society was told that an average of 1,392 parolees are, quote unquote, awaiting release from our prisons. So they've been granted parole, they're waiting to get out, they're waiting to be taken to the door of the prison and sent on their way. We have an institutional bed capacity. The DOC's capacity is broken down into prison beds, correctional centers, and other things like that. But we have a bed capacity inside the prison fences of 46,081, I think, as of this month. And we have 48,300 and some people in them. So, leaving aside the question of where 2,300 men and women are sleeping at night, we could cut the number by 60% if we move the parolees, those 1,300 people, 1,392 people, out of prison faster. But let's look at why they're there. Of the 1,392, on average, that are tied up in our prisons waiting to be let out the door, almost 1,000 of them are sex offenders. They've been known to sit there waiting to get out for years. I have personally handled cases where people were walking off their parole for 7 years before they were finally out the door of the prison. That's right, walking off your parole inside the prison. Now, if you want to ease the overcrowding, why don't we try to get those 1,000 people out a little faster? Why does this happen? Well, unlike any other prisoner, the Department of Correction requires a sex offender to have their home plan approved by the parole board before they can be sent to a halfway house. So for those of you who have a little background in mythology, that's the Gordian knot. How do you find a place to live while you're in the prison and then go to the halfway house? The other way around. And that's because the Department of Corrections labels them hard to place. Now, why do they get labeled hard to place? Well, that's because the parole board rejects home plans for sex offenders at an alarming rate for reasons that sound really good, but have yet to be proven to be important. First, we're going to debunk a myth. The myth that sex offenders reoffend at 80 or 90 or even 100%. It's just not true. We now have the benefit of longitudinal research spanning 30 years or more, and it shows that A, sex offenders as a group reoffend less than 8% over as long as 15 years. B, that more than 93% of all the people arrested for a sexual offense against a minor have no prior criminal record. And C, that after 15 years, a non-sex offender is more likely to commit a sex offense than the former sex offender. The bottom line is this: sex offenders reoffend at a rate which is lower than all other classes of offenders except those convicted of murder. Yet this myth is so pervasive that even the U.S. Supreme Court was taken in by it twice in the past 20 years. Second, let's debunk the myth that where a former sex offender lives can be correlated to where he reoffends. No published study has ever supported that hypothesis. To that end, and to the board's credit, their 1,000-foot residency restriction around schools, playgrounds, and daycare centers was made discretionary. To their debit, if I can use that term, far too many field agents continue to deny good home plans simply because the neighbor's kids get on the school bus at the end of the neighbor's driveway. And in the rural counties, you know what I'm talking about. Third, sex offenders are more likely than others to either outlive their support network of family and friends or be cut off by them while in prison. If no one will take you in, you have to find a place of your own. If you're not a sex offender, you're paroled to a halfway house and you start looking. If you're a sex offender, you You have to find that place to rent while you're still in the prison. So they sit in prison. I've met men who have written upwards of 50 letters hoping someone will offer them temporary housing that the board might approve. Many paroled former sex offenders can show me 6 or 8 rejected home plans, sometimes with no reasons for those rejections. Now, there is some hope. When they get within 24 months of their maximum date, the Bureau of Community Corrections currently offers them placement in a secure center. That's right, a secure halfway house. Try to wrap your mind around a center that you can never leave, a center in which you have no cell phone. The other centers do now. In other words, you're in an upholstered prison. But it creates a few hundred beds if we create secure halfway houses. So we'll put you there. Re-entry value of a secure halfway house, 0. Then when you get within 6 months of your max date, they might move you to a non-secured center. Hundreds of people write to the handful of ministries in Pennsylvania that offer some transient housing, only to learn that there are restrictions on who they can accept. The restrictions have been imposed by the parole board and by some local legislators who are just looking out for their districts. Many of these sex offenders face a term of probation consecutive to their parole. So even when they max out, they're not done yet. So they max out in prison, they're turned over to the probation agency, which arrests them, takes them to the county jail, and charges them with violating their probation because they don't have a place to go. They're incarcerated for being homeless, something the U.S. Supreme Court abolished in 1966, but goes on in Pennsylvania. And a perfect example of this is a man named Samuel Grove, out of Union County, I believe, who is now doing a state sentence because he just couldn't find a place to live while on county probation. The judge made it simple. Like a good dictator, he washed his hands of the matter and said, I'm just going to send you upstate. And now the man will be taking care of the parole board instead of the county probation office. For more than 5 years, the Prison Society has been working on this problem. We take on individual cases, sometimes working with an individual parolee for more than a year to eventually find him and his family a place for that person to live. We meet twice a year with the Bureau of Community Corrections, with the parole board, and with a handful of community organizations that offer this kind of housing. From these meetings, 3 conclusions can be reached. 1, the Department of Corrections policy to bar former sex offenders from the centers, the halfway houses, for the lack of an approved home plan is cyclically counterproductive. In essence, those who most need the step-down level into the community are those who can't have it. In other words, those with the least amount of support will be the ones who go straight from prison to homelessness, or in some cases, into the county jail. 2, the parole board practice related to home plans for former sex offenders is scientifically unsound and results in a rejection rate that can't be defended by any accepted research. Put it mildly, it's a CYA approach to home plans. And 3, community organizations need to step up on a larger scale. Sadly, even the faith-based organizations categorically deny former sex offenders access to shelters and housing. If more organizations, ministries in this context, were providing transient housing for paroled former sex offenders, we would not only be directly serving a few more individuals, but we would be showing the Commonwealth that these men and women do successfully re-enter our communities, and that the previous 2 conditions that I mentioned don't stand. I do want to take a minute to thank publicly a few people who've worked on this. Within the DOC at the Bureau of Community Corrections, former Deputy Director Jill Shepler, who just retired this month, has been great at trying to break this problem down and make it solvable. She's leaving us in the capable hands of her associates. At the Parole Board, we've had great help from Regional Directors Tom Costa and Kelly Evans, along with Jason Stauffer from their reentry section. And within the community, Bishop Weiser of the Just for Jesus Ministry, John Rush and his colleagues at the New Person Ministry, and a fellow named Truman Evie and some of his colleagues who just opened a month ago the Stepping Stones to Freedom House in Belleville. And just last week, their first parolee arrived. Any organizations that want to get involved in helping solve this problem, I'll be here for at least an hour after the panel's over. Thank you.
Mr. John, can I have a request? Yes. Can I request the go last, please?
Okay, sure.
Okay. I actually have a PowerPoint, so I guess we need to pull that up for a second. My name is Dr. Kori Novak, and I specialize in aging within the prison system, most specifically on the utilization of hospice in prisons and the incident of degenerative neurocognitive disease in prisons, so dementias, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and how those diseases affect our aging prisoners. Most of the folks I work with are lifers, people who expect to die within the system. So I absolutely appreciate what you were saying. I have I don't deal with anybody that ever gets out. So I hope that somebody out there can help you. My folks don't leave.
Well, we hope we can change that too someday.
I would love it if you could take my people away from me. All right, so I don't have a clicker or anything.
Okay, I'll...
Okay, no problem. So most of the work I've done, as I said, is working with the aging prisoners. And unfortunately, oftentimes people forget about these folks. In the prison system, if you're not familiar, oftentimes our bodies respond 10 to 15 years older and faster than they do in the non-incarcerated world. So we're looking at 40-year-olds coming in with Alzheimer's disease and Korsakoff's, dementia and Lewy body dementia, and it's not considered early onset because their bodies are reacting as if they were 50, 60, 70 years old, and they're actually still middle-aged. So,
Here's the clicker.
oh, a clicker. All right. Excellent. Of course, apparently there's nothing on that slide. I'm not sure what happened there. Technical difficulties.
I got a funny message, and I'm hoping that's not bad news.
Well, we'll just keep talking, and then eventually we'll go back to that, and you'll see what I have to say.
I'll try it again.
You can tell if I was lying or not, because the slides will tell you. So, now I don't know what I was saying. Oh, none of it's there. Oh, that's
Let me try it
very unfortunate. I had some really great photos.
Let's try
Okay.
this again.
All right. Anyway, so some of the work that I've done has looked at, and I'll talk specifically on the hospice since we're kind of waiting for some other things here, has worked on what happens when you actually teach offenders how to care for other human beings. I think all too often we forget that care is something that's taught. It's not always known. It's not always something that we all grow up with, and unfortunately, too many of our inmates do not have functional families, grew up in very dysfunctional situations where they didn't know what care was, what a caring touch was, what it meant to care about somebody else. And so what we're finding is as individuals are dying, living their natural lives in prisons, and dying in a natural way, we're needing to have more options than just sending them off to the hospital every time they get ill. So for example, someone with COPD, let's say they're 50 years old, they could live another 30 years, happily live another 30 years, but one day they start having problems breathing, as happens. So we send them to the hospital. That costs the taxpayer an enormous amount of money. So I always tell people when I'm talking, whether you care about these individuals because they're humans and we need to care about them because they're breathing, or you don't care about them and we all know there's people out there that don't care about prisoners. But these folks cost a lot of money. So I tell people, whether you care about the person or you care about your money, you need to listen to what I'm saying. Because we're costing taxpayers a lot of money by sending them to a COPD patient to the hospital 2-3 times a week. We pay for the ambulance, we pay for the hospital services, we pay for the guard, depending on their custody level. It could be 2, maybe even 3 guards. That's overtime. We pay for the trip back. We pay for their meds. And then 2 days later, they have another episode and they have to go back. The alternative to this would be to provide something like hospice. Now I say something like hospice because obviously it can't be a full-blown hospice. We don't bring volunteers in. We don't do anything like that. But we still utilize hospice concepts. The interdisciplinary team, utilizing a clergy member, a social worker, a nutritionist, a physician, and a volunteer for each case. The difference is that in the prisons, our volunteers are other prisoners. We take inmates, we teach them hospice values, how to take care of other prisoners. And then when we have death watches, when we have people that need to help the prisoner within their last 3 months, these volunteers act as their loved one, as their one person that cares for them. And I've talked to men, typically men, simply because there's, as we know, a higher rate of male incarceration than females, just in general. And so most of my research has been done within male prisons. And I've talked to men who have said, you know, I'd be dead if I wasn't here. I would have died out on the streets. And I did horrible things. And I had one tell me, Dr. Novak, I don't know if there's a God, but if there is, this is the best I can do to try to make up for what I've done. And I've watched these men who have, with their own hands, murdered, raped, stolen from other people, also take cold cloths and wipe the brow of somebody dying, rub lotion on their feet, hold their hand and speak softly to them. And that just tells me that there's grace in prison. And whether you want to call it grace, you want to call it age, you want to call it whatever, there's a change that's made. And so my onus is to talk to these individuals and then go back and take my research and go to law schools, go to places like this, go to Secretary Wetzel's office, been there several times, and encourage them to not only create hospice programs, not just one for the state, because that's not enough. There's not enough beds. One for every facility is really what's needed. And then allow these hospice people or myself or whomever to come in and train the inmates. Yay! Woo! Technology works. Okay, so now we'll just go back to this and I'll stop getting on my soapbox. Okay, we know a lot of these numbers and I'm sure you can read it that the population's growing like crazy. But when you match that with the population of the boomers, and we keep talking about the wave of boomers coming into non-incarcerated situations, the same goes for the prisons. And because they tend to get sicker faster, within those 10 to 15 years faster, we're seeing an enormous amount of people needing an enormous amount of health care as they age, and we are not prepared for that. We're not prepared for it non-incarcerated, and we're certainly not prepared for it in the incarcerated world. This is a unique population. They actually usually suffer from at least 3 chronic diseases. Oftentimes this is because this population didn't exactly necessarily have good health care coming in, and so they tend to be sicker. Most have something like COPD, end-stage renal, and Korsakoff's dementia. Korsakoff's dementia is alcohol-related dementias. As we're seeing them age in their 50s, which is not aging to me, but it kind of makes me a little sick when they say 50's old, and I think, oh boy. So when they talk about the elderly 50-year-olds who are having bouts with Alzheimer's, and we don't have security staff or administrative staff that understand the differences between aberrant behaviors in prison and neurological disease, and they're putting these people in solitary for being bad, and we're essentially killing them. It becomes cruel and unusual punishment if they have a dementia of some sort. It's frightening. And it's growing. And of course, as with the outside world, dementia is not something that can be 100% diagnosed until you're dead. So we have a lot of individuals who are suffering from these kinds of diseases, and we're not diagnosing them, and they're getting sicker and sicker. Did it go? No?
Actually, the clicker's not going to work because I had to change computers.
Okay. Well then. This is just some photos of aging individuals in prison. And it's amazing, you know, we forget that most prisons were built in the 50s and 60s when you didn't have somebody who had a walker that needed to get into the cell. So a lot of the older prisons are not prepared for this population. They can't put prisoners with walkers in cells because they can't get their walker or their wheelchair through the door. We're looking at the problems that we have with de-weaponizing things like wheelchairs, hearing aids, canes, and that's a big problem because very few people know how to do that. you can see there's a couple pictures of inmates helping other inmates. As it stands in most states, if you are not a hospice inmate, quote, quote, and you touch another inmate like that, say helping him up because he can't stand, you can get put in the hole. You're not to touch other inmates. I get that for some reasons, but if your friend falls down and can't get up, and you help them, and you get sent a month of solitary confinement, I think there's something wrong with that. And I have heard of those situations. And the final important picture on this page is the black and white one on the lower left-hand corner. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I think you see 4 or 5 men carrying a coffin. That's at Angola State Prison, one of the best hospices in the nation, incarcerated or non-incarcerated as far as I'm concerned. And they have the most beautiful hospice program I've ever seen. They train their inmates to really care, and these inmates go above and beyond to the point where they build their coffins for the people they care about. And then they have a beautiful horse-drawn carriage drawn by 2 Persian horses, one black, one white, for diversity, which is just one of those things that they just started within the last, I think, 20 years, I was told. And this carriage is like nothing, you can't even describe it. It's ornate, it's beautiful. And they will take their deceased inmate, and they'll take the carriage to this cemetery. And if any of you are familiar with Angola, it's 18,000 acres. It's huge. And they will drive this horse and carriage, will take their beloved one. It's 3 miles from G, which is, G Block is their infirmary. It's 3 miles to the cemetery. And the prison family and the hospice workers will walk behind the coffin for 3 miles. Oftentimes in the the Louisiana heat, in their uniforms, which are jeans and long sleeve shirts, or short sleeve in that case, depending on the time of year. And the respect that is shown to the dead there is like none I have ever seen. And it's amazing. And if we could age that well in the non-incarcerated world, we'd be a much better place. But if we could teach more of our incarcerated individuals how to respect, and have our non-incarcerated respect our incarcerated individuals like this, it would change the system. My dissertation was focused primarily on how that changes the system, how teaching people to care for each other changes, and it changed Angola from a place where men slept with books on their chest for fear of getting shanked at night, to a place where they, when I say roam freely, understand roaming freely is sort of a loose term, but they go at night to their clubs, to their church services, and nobody's afraid. Now, it's still a prison, it's still dangerous, you have to be realistic about that, but they don't sleep with books on their chests because they've learned to care about each other, and they care about their community, which is a lot more than I can say for some of the communities in the non-incarcerated world. This photo means a lot to me. It sums up why I do what I do. I don't think that the gentleman, this is Kentucky State Prison, and I don't think the gentleman that that's a picture of could have hurt anybody. He was frail, he was 52, and he was dying of Parkinson's disease. He could barely lift his head. He sits when he's upright in a chair, in a motorized wheelchair. And when I met him, they introduced me, and he said, and that was it. And I talked to him for a minute, and his response was, He couldn't lift his head to even look at me. And yet we cuffed him to take him for a doctor's appointment. He also costs the state of Kentucky almost $325,000 a year. He takes up a bed and a place in the prison that they desperately need because of the overcrowding situation, and he could grunt at me. This is how we treat our aging in the prisons. we talk about nursing homes and dementia units, but the fact is, a dementia unit on the outside is a prison with better pictures on the walls. We lock down, we feed them when we want to feed them, we tell them what they want to know, and we let them sit. So what's the difference between what we do for our grandma and what we do for the murderer down the street? And why can't we do it better for all of them?
Great work. Just wanted to say that. We have a project called Release of Aging People in Prison also. Yes, totally. Thank you for using a lot of the images that we own, which is good. No, so sorry. We need that because it needs to be out there more. This is why we put them out there, right? And when you speak about conditions in prison, you know, it's amazing. My name is Muallim-ak. I'm the director of the Incarcerated Nation Corporation. And our motto is, you can judge its society by how it treats its prisoners. One thing I just wanted to say before I speak is that we call people prisoners, inmates, felons, ex-offenders, convicts. It's all insulting language. And one of our founding members, Eddie Ellis, had wrote a paper in which we asked people to call people, returning citizens, a person incarcerated, a mother incarcerated, a human. You see, the process of desensitization of a person is through incarceration, where we strip people like slavery, literally take everything that you own, every clothes that you own, wash you up, disinfect you, cut you, then give you a number, and you are state property. Right? So language plays a big part in how we relate. So I just ask everyone at this conference to be conscious of your language and know that you hurt people when you say this felon or ex-offender, as if the society doesn't create conditions to make them offend society. I believe people don't commit crimes, people commit acts. And certain acts get criminalized and certain communities get criminalized. The other thing is, you mentioned about incarceration and homelessness, right? Well, across America, incarceration is considered willful. So when you come home, there's actually laws that don't allow you to retain housing, government housing, low-income housing, public housing, anywhere, because incarceration is considered willful and you've only been homeless for one day, even if you've been in prison for 15 years. So those are little things that need to change, because the current state of incarceration and the conditions that people are in are horrendous inside. And it's amazing you mentioned Angola, which actually is the worst prison in America. It is not a great place, and it doesn't have the best hospice care, it has the worst. And that horse-drawn carriage is actually because it's a slave plantation. And Angola will own your body past the point of you dying. What you don't see is, yes, they march your body around the prison to show that they own you. And that is the same way the slaves were done. And then they bury you in the backyard and keep you. Why? Because we fought for 44 years to get a man, who I call a friend of my family, out of solitary, Herman Wallace, who we then successfully got out, who was innocent by the federal courts, and his co-defendant, Albert Woodfox, still spending over 45 years in solitary, is innocent by the federal court and the U.S. government. And the warden says, I own him, and he will be on that horse-drawn carriage, and we will own his body, and we keep you. In other words, when you die, they own you like slavery. They said, no, our prisoners are fertilizer. So we plant them. They have convict rodeo. So these are the conditions of people in prison today. It is actually a slave plantation, and actually has the highest number of LWOP. We have children as young as 12 who have been sentenced to die in Angola because the state owns them. And the warden is now facing jail because he refused to let people out. Until they go into hospice, no, we'll keep them. And then when they die, we'll own their bodies. So I'm from New York State, and I would definitely love Anthony to exaggerate and exasperate on what is going on in Philly, because I like to keep it on the eye. In New York, we invented felony disenfranchisement. A lot of people don't know that. You know, the state of incarceration in New York. We do 85% of your sentence time. But it's a structure where perpetual. It's amazing that you said that, because we have a project called Release of Asian People in Prison, because perpetual punishment is torture too. Are you the same person you were when you were 15? No. Right? But we have people that spend decades in past their sentencing time. In other words, you have 20 years, and you've been hit at the parole board that added additional 20 years onto your sentence. People incarcerated and people previously incarcerated are perpetually punished. So even though I'm supposed to be up here answering a question of what is the state of incarceration, we have to address what is the state of reentry in people in the community. This is why a Center for Returning Citizens and projects that like that, our national projects, are so important, because no one serves an indefinite and a determinate sentence. Everyone has a lifetime bid, because you're permanently disenfranchised. You are permanently placed into a separate caste system of disenfranchisement when you return to just another outside prison. Because in New York State, we have the largest municipal police force. So when you come home, it's a whole different story, right? People spend 23 to 24 hours a day in a cell in the state that I'm in for minor reasons, like looking back at an officer, like impeding the movement of an officer, forgetting to pick up your fork in the mess hall, or charges that I had that were like sharpened wooden objects, which were pencils, right? So we have people that we place into punishment circumstances, and that's what prison is. Correctional facilities refuse to facilitate correction. In other words, we're just punishing. Punishment doesn't do anything. It just makes a person avoid that punishment. You have to change a person in here and in here in order to make them change. They took education out of prison, right? So we live in a state, in a facility, in a state where we have the most colleges in the world, right, in New York. We have 26 community colleges alone. But you can't get college in certain schools except for bold schools like Cornell, like Bard's system, right, who still fight to teach it. Right? So the current state of incarceration for those are just like what we do in society reflects inside the community. And what we do in the community reflects inside the prison. So as we disenfranchise people from services and social resources that they need outside, the same thing is being done inside. We're living below poor. The food is, I don't think we have time for that. It's not even food, technically, to the point that the farmers tell us now, if you can take my food and bring it down to the church, I would rather have that than sell to the prison. So we have a whole Freedom Food Alliance that provides that. So the current state of people in prison is suffering and slavery, literally perpetual punishment. Sorry, I need to pass this mic.
My name is Anthony Dickerson. I'm the Director of Prison Outreach for the Center for Returning Citizens. I'm also an executive board member of the Coalition Against Mass Incarceration with Nancy Anderson over there in the pink shirt. To chime in on what he said, which was very important. One of the reasons we use the name Returning Citizen is to stave off stigma that's carried with those titles that we were put on. Ex-offender, ex-con. And under those labels and through that language, it makes it hard for people like you to come in and help do what's necessary to correct the problem. Because if I'm an ex-offender or ex-con, I'm not going to be as motivated to help as if I were a returning citizen or a person. So it's very important that we adopt that into our lexicon. And to the city of Philadelphia's credit, I mean, they didn't give John Dye the credit that he deserved coming up with that. But they did change their city charter, deleted ex-offender from it, and replaced it with returning citizen. They like that. One of the things that I do at Prison Outreach is predominantly I deal with a lot of legal issues. I'm a paralegal, and I basically perfected my craft helping prisoners with their legal matters from behind bars, and I developed a name for it. So a lot of people come to me with a lot of problems to this day. One of the, everything that I do is centered on getting people out of prison. I have initiatives ranging from life sentencing all the way down to parole. Trying to get good time reinstated in Pennsylvania. Everything that I focus on is to try to get people out of prison, because unless we can get people out of prison, families will remain fragmented. If the family remains fragmented, the community will be in a state of unrest. If the community is in a state of unrest, it's going to be chaos. Yes. So we have to get people back home and back into their families to stabilize things. Because most of the families that I meet when they come into my office, if you just sit and go through one of these sessions, you'll see the trauma and instability caused by that person being gone for so long. One of the things that will help is if we begin to give a honest assessment of things and contribute what is necessary. Because unfortunately, the way things work, you may hear something on TV about reentry. Federal government allocates $2 billion for reentry. That money never gets to the communities affected by mass incarceration. It's gobbled up by big foundations and universities. But yet, I have a roster of over 500 people in my office. People who came home looking for work, looking for housing. I can't send them to Penn and say, go to Penn. They got $10 million for reentry. Or Temple, they got $2 million for reentry. They get all the money. But you can't send nobody down there to get no assistance. So it's vital that we create other avenues, other streams of revenues to people that are on the ground doing the real work. It's important that we look at that, because we get a lot of good people who really, volunteer, but they can only volunteer for so long. We can only keep good people for so long. And this is a 24-hour job. It's not like reentry stops at 3 o'clock. It goes on and on and on. I mean, you're dealing with people through a traumatic experience that never stops. It took me, 9 months from release to get a job? I didn't get a job till he found me one. Now, just imagine being out of work for 9 months. No money. Now, where are you going to get money from? I can't tell you how many times people came in the office and said, I can't do this no more. I got to do what I got to do. I can't tell you how many times I came out of my pocket and paid for people to get a haircut to go on an interview. Or find clothes for them. I took a guy down the street, bought a pair of pants for him so he can go on an interview. We don't have a fraction of the things we need to do this work. And that's one of the reasons I felt it was necessary for me to come here today. Is because from what John Dodd communicated to me and what Nancy Anderson communicated to me, that this forum, it will be people who will be responsive to a lot of the things that we had to say and would give us strong consideration about helping us do this work and move things forward. So hopefully I can answer any question. Anything about prison you want to know, ask me. Yes. I know it.
Hi, you guys. Good afternoon. Y'all got an earful. I'm Tot. Tot Metz, but I also go by Yellow, and that's a whole nother story. But we talking about Tot right now, right? All right. So let me just move over here. My laptop is right here.
And just let me know when you're ready.
All right. Yeah, that's going to be probably at the end. I don't know. Okay. So we talked about aging. We talked about hospice. We talked about homelessness. We talked about returning citizens. We ain't talking about no youth. I'm the voice for the youth.
All right now.
I was attacked by the law called Act 33. Act 33 was a law that was created in 1996. It allows juveniles under the age of 18 to be held pre-trial, charged with adults, and held in adult facilities for a number of crimes. Simple as a school fight. You could even be a first-time offender. I was locked up. I served a short period of time, but in that short period of time, it took me through a traumatic change. You know, having this, I don't even want to get into that. You know what? I'm gonna switch that up. I'm gonna come back. Going inside a facility where the doors only open one way. When you have gatekeepers, they have the key. They open this door that only opens one way. You are only 17 years old, or you could be 16 or 15, under the age of 18. You don't really know, you're still a sponge until you're 25. A lot of people don't know that. I endured this experience and I took it in. It was an organization that came out every Saturday and did workshops with the juveniles that was held at RCF around adults. And they did art and poetry. We learned a lot from them, and this is how I got involved with the work I'm doing now. And, you know, I don't do this every day, you know, this is not something I do on a regular, but this is something I have a passion for. I have a voice to speak for the youth that's locked up right now. Because, believe it or not, it's probably somebody's child in there that's probably crying their eyes out and ready to commit suicide. Because once you're a juvenile and you're around adults, and you're in an adult facility and you're being treated like an animal, and you're only 15, 16, 17, you don't really know. You don't know how to react to that type of experience. So that experience will take you through some things and it make you become deranged, but you're not an animal. Remember that. You're not an animal. You're a human being. Everybody makes mistakes. And see the jails, they don't really know. The judges, I don't think they really understand what life is about. You know, you're going to fall down a couple times, but you have to get back up. You're going to make some mistakes, but you got to learn from them. Because you're going to have a generation after you. It's going to always be reproducing, you know, because we're humans, that's what we do, right? That's what we do. So it's going to be more people involved in this community, and we have to be the ones that teach them about the experience that we have went through. You know, in my experience, it goes a long way. I went inside schools and did workshops about people being products of their environment. Now, you can analyze that statement any way you want. Me and Mr. Bob over here, we had a conversation earlier because he was my ride, and we talked about people being products of their environment. I'm a product of my environment. I didn't respond back to him when he said his response to me. I agree with it on both ends. It's a negative and it's a positive. The negative fact is that I used to be a child that got kicked out of school. My grades was always on point. Got kicked out of school, was fighting, got locked up. You know, after I graduated, that don't make no sense, but you know, things happen because I'm a product of my environment. I used to sell drugs. I stopped that. When I got locked up and that organization came to me and it spoke to me, it touched me and it turned me around. Like, hold up. You got, girl, you know you young. And I looked at myself and I said, I am, man, look at me. I'm young. I can do this. I'm an example now. And that's what I became. But I became that great example, whereas though my story is going to touch y'all. You won't be able to tell my story to somebody else. Yeah, I was locked up. But look at me now. I'm here talking to y'all about ending mass incarceration, bringing our people home. You know, I ain't really had nothing really set up. I kind of try to put some stuff together and talk about some stuff, but I really just go off the top because that's where it comes from. That's the, you know, that's the passionate, you know, the passion and the work that I do. And you know, like I said, we talked about all these things, but who's making the next step? And then, you know, Mr. Bob said, you know, we could talk all day. We could talk all day, y'all. But who gonna put their foot behind that pedal and accelerate the gas? Vroom, vroom, we out. We gotta make a movement. Without a movement, it's power behind numbers. Without a movement, we nothing. Now, with a movement, with the numbers, with the people, with the voices, we are something. We are a family. And a family comes a long way. A lot of people have been losing that sight on what a family actually is. Right. You know, there's a lot of educated people in this room, and I hope that my messages get to y'all. Like I said, I don't do this every day. I always get nervous when I get on the mic, but I know what I'm talking about. So, and I can't give y'all advice that I haven't taken myself. You feel what I'm saying? And my rider right here, right? That's my baby. That's my mom right there. And she used to be an activist, and I think that's where my voice comes from and why I'm so into this and into helping bringing people home and decarcerate in Philadelphia and the Center for Returning Citizens, because that's my pop-pop right there. And you know, like I just really hope that whatever I said and whatever the other panelists said, it get to y'all and we start making some moves. Because today, tomorrow, the next day, the next year, whatever. We need to fight. We need to fight. That's what I'm going to say. We need to fight. We need to put the powers behind the numbers behind the powers, however you want to put it. If you're blind, we need to get some braille books and communicate. We need to connect. We need to move forward. We need to bring this to a upcoming civil rights movement or something like that. Bring our family members home.
Talk about it.
Did you hit my video? It's only about 2 minutes. This is I made a documentary with an organization called the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project. Those are the people that actually went inside the jails every Saturday and come to visit me.
I'm going to have to use the mic.
Okay.
My cousin just fell. I fell with him. Like, this is when I never knew that guns could hurt. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, it just always been fights, drug dealing, and I learned what I saw.
I come from a troubled family. Most of my brothers are locked up. 2 of them are dead. And I think it feels like I have to follow in their footsteps.
Back in high school, he, you know, always got the grades and honor rolls, and just like when he came home, he was just around the whole crowd.
You cannot move away from this process. It crosses socioeconomics, it crosses color, it crosses.
That's all I could get out of my mouth. I just want to see myself. And it just sounded a bit.
And look, see, this is the reality. All the pain and the misery, but everybody she touching your name will relieve her from her anger. The more time will deliver her and her family will live peacefully. You know, Dave, I wish you just come back.
If I could replace my pain with anything, it would be a dream. Because jail is going to be my life. So my life is without pain.
It's like living in a war zone. And because the violence has become so common, we don't even address it, and we assume that our children are okay, but they're not. So they're growing up, they're being re-traumatized, and then they're becoming either victims or perpetrators. So it's a vicious cycle.
What we're all going to do is we're going to break this little prison pipeline. We're crossing out the prison. We're not doing that. We're not playing that game. So what kind of pipeline are we going to build instead? Success.
Right, we need to let these kids know it's an organization out here that care about them and that want to see them do well and want them to get an education, you know, and we're fighting to stop sending youth to adult prisons for a reason.
At what point are we going to create good solutions for our children, good things to help promote their well-being and to make them positive, productive, responsible members of society, as opposed to putting them in cages, putting them in facilities, and making them worse criminals than they are prior to them going in.
You can find that documentary, the full documentary that is only the trailer. You can contact Sarah Morris. She works with the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project. You can contact her if you would like to get in touch with her or get that film. That film is called Stolen Dreams 2, Breaking the Cycle of Youth Trauma, Violence, and Imprisonment. It has won an award. So it's an award-winning documentary, and the documentary is only 26 minutes long. I'm telling you, you'll get so much information out of it. Thank you.
We have 15 or 20 minutes. I think you'll agree with me that I only agreed to be the moderator of this panel because it was such a strong panel. Certainly all 5 presentations were excellent. I'm sure people have some kind of, let's not say rebuttal, but let's say questions or concerns or viewpoints. We have someone right back here first.
Think about how to word this, because it's difficult. There was a time in my life where I would have looked at some of you as bullies and thugs, and I've changed considerably. And one of the things that I've realized is that I never saw you as victims, and yet there's victims on the other side too that are victims of crimes. And I'm beginning to get this picture that what needs to happen is these two groups need to come together. How, because I don't think as long as we're polarized and we're able to look at each other and, you know, look down on each other, they look down on people who've been in prison, you look, you know, probably feel misunderstood, rightfully so, you know, because some of you have been raised in situations or have come from communities where I couldn't even conceive of it. And how do we get these two groups together and stop fighting each other? Because, you know, the victims advocate groups, you know, they'd probably be shrieking if they were sitting here in this congregation of people here. So what do you think we need to do there?
It's you know, victim, that's a great ringtone. Victim advocacy groups is a part of the prison industrial complex. It is really one of the problems because they feel that society plays no role in the reasons why a person committed a crime, whether it's a substantial street-level crime, whether it's trespassing, right? I had a victim advocacy group come after me when I was defending a case of Jerome Murtaugh. And they were saying that the officer who arrested this person was wrong, and he was victimized, and this was a product of the case. Jerome Murtaugh was an American Marine who was homeless and mentally ill and fell asleep in a project staircase and was arrested and had over $2,000 bail and then baked to death in prison and died because they put him in a cell that was 120-something degrees. But why do we arrest homeless people? Well, let's take a step back and realize that in the 80s when Reagan cut community-based funding for mental health facilities, by 1985 those people were on the street. And then we made it illegal to be on the street. We created anti-vagrancy laws, anti-panhandling laws, anti-loitering laws, right? Quality of life laws. We had the great George Bratton coming in with his squeegee laws and broken windows. So rather than society taking responsibility for the conditions it created, we'd rather blame the people. Like something's wrong with these people. This is a documentary with Disney called Prison Kids, and I would love for everyone to take a chance to look at it when you get a chance. It's at fusion.net/Prison Kids, and it's a huge documentary about youth inside of prison and how they're treated and the conditions they have. And you'll see that we have children 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in solitary. What is a 7-year-old doing facing felony assault charges, right? What are we doing? So this is, rather than blaming that, they just give all them kids 600 milligrams of Adderall. I take Adderall. I suffer from bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. I take 100 milligrams because of my body weight. A 7-year-old is taking 5 times that amount. So I say that because victim groups have been a part of the problem because they don't see how they're victimized as well. They're paying for the incarceration, and they're paying, in New York City, we pay $27 a month per person in a shelter. And we have 61,000 homeless people every night, after every bed is full in every shelter in New York City. So it's an expense that you, again, the citizens, are duped in, and you pay for the products. Amazing stuff.
I just want to say something about that. I think, and this is maybe a little bit Pollyanna-ish, but if we don't say it, then it can't come to fruition. But I think that these groups, these separate groups that kind of maybe fight against each other, like we were saying, or don't understand each other, I think the bottom line is educating each other. And it's understanding that both groups have valid things to say. It's a very emotional kind of conversation, but it's accepting and not turning off when you hear something offensive or you hear something that you just know in your gut is wrong, saying to yourself or saying to your neighbor, whomever, is that really wrong? And it starts with education, getting people into education, people who want to do things like social work, like some of these types of positions that deal with therapists, criminal justice, and making sure that they have open minds and that we understand each other, whether it's a victim's rights, or a formerly incarcerated individual or their rights, and understanding that it's very emotive either way, and listening to each other and then educating each other.
I think that before anything can take place, people have to get comfortable with the idea of empowering people like me and him.
Right.
If you're not interested in empowering people like me, you're not really helping.
Right.
You know, so it's really something that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to reach that level on your own, working amongst each other, talking to people, having forums like this, and growing into that state. I believe once we can get comfortable with the idea of empowering people like me and him, then we can actually eradicate this problem.
Right.
Otherwise, we come up with ideas and swirl them around, and they'll get played out, and then somebody will come up with another idea, get played around, and they'll be extending the jails, they'll continue to grow, and you'll be wondering why the great jails are still growing, and recidivism, and the crime, and the violence. Is because to me, we have yet to reach that point to where we have to view returning citizens as a solution to the problem. They experience it, they know it firsthand, people coming out of jail like John Dye, like Five, like Tot. We've been there, we know it, and we could give a perspective to you that could help shape something, and you could, in turn, provide a perspective for us. But it has to be, at some point, we gotta be honest, and we have to determine whether or not it's within your interest to empower people like me and Five.
I think victim groups really started, it is right, education, she's 100% right, what I was trying to get you, is that victim groups started out because people shouldn't profiteer off their crimes. It actually started when you had a lot of serial killers that actually started to write books, like Ted Bundy, right? And then those cases is what really came into the fact that you're not going to kill my children and then write a story about it and get a movie. Right? So that's where the principle is at, but it has now gone into extra punishment, right? Extra punitive segregation because of the initial crime. I think that that's where we take it a step beyond.
Other questions, comments?
One of the steps that everybody in this audience can do to start working on what the two gentlemen on the right end of the table suggested is each church can take on prison ministry as a function of the whole congregation. Dr. Trulier's Slow Peace, in his book that was brought upstairs, Ministry with Prisoners and Families, points out that how is it in any congregation service to shut-ins is the whole congregation's responsibility. The prison ministry is the responsibility of a very small number of people who are specialized. And when I can see you as my brother, then the idea, gee, I might just be my brother's keeper. Maybe I ought to try to walk in what his walk is and try to see the world through his or her eyes. And maybe I'll realize that my brother looks just like people I know in my congregation and may struggle with the same kinds of things. Maybe we have more in common than we realize. And you stop being the other and start being my brother. And it would be a huge, huge step, because right now too many congregations see folks in jail as not like me. And then you start to meet people and you realize, gee, they look like random people. And guess what? Random people make mistakes. Some get caught and some don't. And a very wise friend of mine who spent time in jail, his pastor pointed out there's only two kinds of people, the caught and the uncaught. And that brought me up short. I thought, gee, you know, I've done stuff that in another situation, like was I black and poor, would have got me on the inside looking out, and maybe I'm not so different than the folks I'm seeing in jail. And I don't think any of us are all that different. One piece. The other piece I've heard is that there's a big gap between policy and practice in our state DOC. And I've heard Secretary Wetzel talk about the change that he's trying to bring about. And he gets pretty cranky that it takes so long, but he is like the captain of a super tanker trying to change its direction with a little bitty oar sticking out the back end. And the more we activate for the kind of change you're describing, like Kori talked about hospice. I happen to be in correspondence with a lifer at the Muncie Women's Prison who sees lifers getting less and less medical care because the less care, then the sooner they'll die and be off our books. And yet, the rule that inmates cannot lay hands on another inmate gets in the way of hospice, which can be redeeming both for the people who need the hospice care and the people who are in a position to offer it. That'd be fantastic. And as you say, none of us are getting any younger, and if somehow that policy can be modified to permit a hospice volunteer activity in each prison, the benefit would be multitudinous. It would be huge, both for those offering service and those receiving service. I don't know what the policy is right now, but I do know that Secretary Wetzel needs support for making that change. And support / activism, you know, get off the line and start making the change, and support to help that change take place. Thank you.
No, thank you. So as you directed the question, I would like to give a response. One, a lot of facilities mostly use people incarcerated to then do hospice because they don't want to hire outside staff, mostly for oversight as well, accountability. Number two, I think that starting to just support other chaplains who work in the facilities. Majority of people who have a comment ain't never been there, not even on a visit. But they have all these great opinions about people who are incarcerated who are just there returning citizens, people who return to the county of conviction. I'm from New York State, where chaplains are outnumbered by churches. In other words, there could be 50 surrounding churches. And one guy from Brooklyn, I'm going to give you that example, his name is Rebbe Mazar. He lives, his temple is in Brooklyn, and he works in Southport, in upstate, right? He lives up there practically. This man is outnumbered and does 2-3 facilities. Some chaplains are covering, here you are, the Catholicism chaplain, and you're covering the Festival of Id, or you're covering another religious services, right? They're outnumbered and they need help and they need support. And this is why organizations like the National Religious Campaign Against Torture is bringing the conversation to community by having people directly impacted to join a movement that is against torture, right? That type of unity and a symbol of unity is what faith should be. It should be everyone united to raise, because who is the moral police of society if not you? Are we going to allow torture to still continue? Because it does happen. I mean, the days of the hitching post still happen in juvenile facilities when you hold your food slide. They chain the kids' hands to the slide as punishment. There is corporal punishments like the closet, where we take little kids and put them in a closet. You don't have to believe me, there's plenty of websites to look it up, and you can look up juvenilejustice.com, or you go to my website, incarceration.org.com, and you can actually see how they put little kids in a closet, strap them to the wall, and then close the door. Like, this is a sick system that if we allow it, it's going to continue to go on at your cost. So if you're paying for it and you know it's happening and you do nothing about it, then we're just going to have to understand that that's what you want. So even starting by supporting yourself inside of facilities. Do you know that it's religious services in New York State that can do all of the alternative to violence? All of the alternative to violence programming inside of facilities? It is the chaplains that actually hold festivals. It is the chaplains that actually stood up and said, free visits is less than the 1% of the budget, because that's what they, less than 1% of the state's budget to do transportation for people to see their children, right? Even though we know stats of recidivism are lower when families are connected, right? That was cut out. It was the chaplains who took their personal cars to bring families up, but they need help. So start, perfect example, starting by helping yourself inside. Yeah.
I just want to make one quick comment about the hospice and not being able to touch other prisoners. Currently, that's kind of the overall climate of regulation in the U.S. Places that have hospices do make the exception for those individuals who are hospice volunteers, who are official. It's the ones who are not official that can get in trouble if they touch someone.
I probably won't be answering no questions, I'm gonna be all honest with y'all. But I do have some information. Y'all can see what I'm up to and check me out on Facebook, follow me on Twitter if you guys want. I can give y'all my contact info also, because I'm not really going to be staying around to like really connect with you guys, so y'all can connect with me on a personal level. My number is 267-981-4949. And again, it's 267-981-4949. You can follow me on Facebook or request me at Be Aware, BE space aware. That's part of my clothesline too. It's just to spread awareness. I do music also. I'm an MC. I can come talk to your child if you need me to. I'm a youth mentor, youth activist. And my Twitter is yellow, the color, _Pharaoh. And PHAROAH. Yeah, _ yellow _ Pharaoh. Yeah, you guys can reach me there. Come on, Mr. John, what you doing?
We have Ron here.
Okay.
I'm a troublemaker, so since you want me to answer these questions.
Oh boy, I'm about to get you.
Well, you're not talking to us, who are you talking to? Who needs to hear what you have to say from your perspective in the communities? Who's out there?
Well, I actually reach out to all different types of audience. I don't have a particular audience that I just randomly reach out to. It's everybody, because I feel like different states, different communities, different people, different cultures, they all have something going on. I'm just the type of person that just to lend the extra hand. I'm tired. I'm yellow. I'll make your days yellow instead of blue and gray. You know what I mean? You won't be sad when you got yellow around. Or top period, because I just bring the funk, Do that answer your question?
Sort of.
I talk to everybody. I create workshops on
you
music.
said you want to be a positive example, and so I'm assuming you're talking to folks that is going to make a difference in their life.
Most definitely.
But I know it's sort of everybody. You have a positive example of me. That's good.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the one you're talking to all the time. So.
But you don't know that.
I
You don't know that. But no, I like to talk to everybody. Anytime I'm having I would call it a heart-to-heart with someone, that's like a one-on-one conversation. Anytime I always incorporate that, I'm always helping people. I have connections with different people in different cities and stuff like that. Bob is one of the persons that's oh my goodness, he's just a big mentor of mine. And of course my man's home right here, you see him? And then I told y'all my papa, listen, I got the connections, I be talking to everybody. I don't have no filter on that one. Seriously.
We've got time for one more, and we're going to reconvene in this room at 3:30 and hear about communities and families.
Can we get her, Miss Dijon? Can we get her?
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Dickerson. And you were talking about there's all this money the government gives for reentry, yet it's gobbled up by the colleges and the universities. Can you talk a little more about that process and how they're like allowed to do that?
I can tell you from experience, the grants that we've applied for. I mean, it blew my mind when me and John Dad had a meeting with the ACLU. They got $50 million to do reentry. Are you kidding me? They don't do reentry. They gave him an award for reentry, and then wouldn't even give us any money.
That's my pop-up, you remember? I told you, yeah.
Reentry organizations are always calling us to validate their program.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's the reality. You know, when a major reentry organization or a foundation or a group, you know, they'll give us awards, they will call us, you know, come to our program and speak, you know, give us small honorariums. They need us to validate what they're doing. Here we have returning citizens who are home, they're in college, they're community activists, they are doing the work that we're talking about.
Right.
You know, so it's like, you know, I hate to say it, look at us as their training groups. That's the reality. I'm saying it plainly. But when it comes time to write a grant for major money to finance our programs, you know, the same folks who invite us to be on their programs are not the ones who invite us to sit down and write grants. You know, several folks who we were always asked to be part of their programs, we went to a grant application session down at City Hall, and there they were together applying for the grant. Never called us, you know, and a major organization got the grant. In terms of ACLU, we've done so much work with them, all right? Soros Foundation gave them $50 million to the National ACLU. And the reason for the grant was to stimulate grassroots organizations in mass incarceration. So I called Reggie Shuford, who's the director of the PA ACLU, and I said, Reggie, I heard you got some money. Let's sit down and have a meeting and talk about how you can incorporate our work into what you're doing. Reggie tells me that, no, we didn't get the money. The National Committee got the money. They're allocating it out, and we're not getting $1 million. So I called Five, who's also, you know, part of the ACLU, and he says, Jay's blowing smoke at you. Yeah. So they got the money. I mean, that's incredible. If you allocated funds for grassroots organizations, you ain't got to give us a whole million. You know, give us 100,000, 150,000. Give us something that says we value your work more than just using you as the image for mass incarceration. It don't make no sense.
More right there, man. And I challenge everyone. If you're a subscriber or a donator to ACLU, you probably get their monthly magazine. Right, look at the centerfold. You'll see a giant picture of me and Juan Mendez there as Human Rights Defenders of the Year. Yeah, that's great, but why don't you help me help others who are in the same circumstance? Because in New York, we have the only reentry program for the roughly 2,000 people coming directly from solitary into the streets. And in New York City, you put on the bus, they open the door, after 5 years and sometimes decades of solitary, and say, here's $40, here's a bus ticket, make it. And that bus drops you off at 42nd Street, Times Square, you got Spider-Man fighting the Capitol of Liberty, you got 20 million commuters and tourists, and you have to navigate your way through the system. So what do? We contact you before then, because great pastors like Reverend Sabuki, let me just throw him out there, from Sing Sing will call me and be like, Five, I got a guy coming home on Tuesday, and nobody help him. Can you go pick him up? Can you go in the train? Can you pick him up at the train station? This one's coming from this bus. Can you pick him up? But without the housing, without the support, then there's but so much that we can do, right? I can bring him, pick him up, or have a location that someone in, and bring him to John Dap. But if he doesn't have the housing, then what are we going to do? So we're doing the work because the conditions in prison are the conditions out here. Disenfranchisement, enslavement, forced servitude, and a lower caste system where you better not look at me because I will smack you down. We have police killing our youth every day and getting away with it, and then doing fundraisers, and people are donating to that. We have major organizations getting money because they want to tokenize us, and here's a little 10 minutes do the song and dance, and then we get funding because this is the problem, this is what we're doing to help it. No, you're not doing that. So those days are over with, and we're asking for help, but it has to be from a moral perspective. Because who is the moral police of society holding these people accountable for what they're doing? And you know, you heard this man, Glenn Martin, up here yesterday, which is a comrade of mine. He worked for the Fortune Society, which I don't like throwing dirt on people, but I'm just going to be honest, I do it. And I don't think people understood what he said. He fundraised for them for 12 years. And when he realized that he raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he's seen them spend a few doing Metro cards and resumes, he was like, wait a minute, I'm the one who gets you the money. What are you not doing? I'm going to do it myself. So when you see people like that, there's a purpose. David Rothenberg is a great man. I love him. But he's hurting. You know why he's hurting? Because David's the guy that you can write in prison. He will write you back personally. It may take him a while. He's a little older now. It may be misspelled. But he's going to write you back because he has 1,000 people that's writing him, and the city gives him enough money to have 2 feds. One job he can provide. So he has to do a lottery. It's hurtful. Sorry. Yes, of course, please.
I just wanted to also talk about, you asked about how or why that happens as far as getting grants through educational places. And this is just my opinion, so don't write this down as research. But I think some of it, unfortunately, has to do with what society often fights with, which is brand management. And that if you, and I have to give a caveat, I work for 2 universities that are quite well known, not Penn, but big universities, and it's easier for us to get grants than it is for a not-for-profit that's doing the work, and part of that is sometimes the money that is stipulated is for research only, which that's obviously can't use it for anything else, but unfortunately, people hear foundations like the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation or some of these big foundations that do a lot of work, and they spend all their money on the research, and then, like our friend here was saying, there's no pedal to the metal. We have lots of great research, but nobody does anything about it. And so I think the problem is the big, well-known universities, don't tell them I'm saying this because I will lose my job, are getting a lot of the funding and not passing it on to the folks that are doing the work. A lot of government grants are specified that they have to go, and I don't know why, this is how they read, must go for research. And again, it's the researcher's duty that we should be giving our information to not-for-profit agencies or for-profit agencies that are doing the work. But unfortunately, researchers get greedy and we take more and more money to do what we do instead of doing what we should be doing, which is working in tandem and in partnership with the people who are doing the work and out on the front lines or whatever. Some researchers, there's a new form of research called active research, and that's where we actually go out and we do some of, for instance, I go into the prisons, I do what I talk about, and then whatever research I glean from that is what the research is. But that's few and far between. So it's really a problem, and I think it's just a problem that society just needs to, we need to raise our hand more and say, hey, what about the people who are doing it? It's great to have the research too, but they can't hog all the money. I think it's just raising our hands and saying, not right, and nobody's done it because the researchers know that, because I know the grant process, I have to do it every day, but I like to think I'm not greedy, but me as the big me may be more greedy and say, this is how I want to make my money and not give it to the people who are doing it, and that's really unfortunate.
I think it's also the lack of respect for people in leadership, and I think that they don't want to see people previously incarcerated in leadership.
You're good. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah. He has a question.
We like that.
Now, in planning for this, I'm not going to blow my horn too much, but we've been trying to do this for a long time.
the director of community relations at Germantown Friends gave me a list 2 years ago, and on the back of the list, there was the Pennsylvania Council of Churches. And in our planning, grassroots organizations do not have an adequate source of funding. We've heard that. We've heard it from 3 or 4 different people. This is a body, 1,800 members, that could contribute $100 a month and provide significant support for this effort. And it can be done. The Pennsylvania Council of Churches could take the money. We could set up a board that would administer it and put the money where it belongs, all over the state, and it would be a beginning. And I'm hoping that Jay's going to distribute a paper. You're going to keep it all to yourself. No, really, think about it.
Everybody take a moment. I just want to take a 1-minute exercise. Take a moment, and I'm going to do what Glenn did yesterday, right? Close your eyes and imagine an organization that is doing free bus trips for people to be able to reunify children with their families. Providing a safe space for children with family that are incarcerated. I'm talking about sharing reading program, letter writing program, taking photos to send it to the parents, providing packages for people incarcerated, providing a letter writing project funded by students and working to literally write thousands of people trapped in solitary, to create projects like releasing of aging people in prison and other projects that are doing direct service, to create, imagine this organization, creating food pantries, then creating systems that empower the people incarcerated to help provide funds for their family. Right? And then think about the director of that project. Do you see an African American or a person of color directly impacted running that? Because that's what we do every day. That's what John and I do. If you don't see his face, then you're not looking at any organization right now. Because there is no organization in this world, in this country, that is top-down manned by people previously incarcerated, all the way through directly impacted, made up and volunteered from the families and friends, than our collective projects. So if you don't see us in a solution, then you're just seeing us as the problem. But those closest to the problem is closest to the solution. So I thank you for your time and listening.
Thank you all.
Okay, we did run over, but we've got some time. I encourage you all, there should be some coffee and stuff like that upstairs. Please visit the bookstore, visit the exhibit. Still encourage anyone who hasn't done the solitary confinement cell to take time there. And so we'll convene back here right around 3:30.
Besides being a volunteer prison chaplain for over 10 years, I volunteer here called the Catholic Support Foundation. And we talk about the importance of educating landlords and renters about writing. Okay. Well, for a while I volunteered as a reentry coordinator found the state website. Exactly, yeah. Do you sort of knocking word, would you be interested, I have no idea what you do during the week. That's what my spare time, yeah. Trying to figure out a way to put you into a forum talk to landlords, rental agencies. I pretty much knew what I heard you say. I have my own boss doing something. You have a car? I was actually in the Guardian Spirit Pastoral Counseling training. justice. And luckily, I have a young friend of the family who has you know the way better than I do. Yeah, I will pursue this because I would love to network. Yeah, private landlords are the most likely. Apartment complexes turn out. Yeah. Whether it's drug addiction, violence addiction, certain things. They hands down. Of course, they fix the pets either. Yeah. You know, we can do that to everything. They don't want anything to do with people. Right. But private landlords are the only real resource out there. We have a cluster in North Philadelphia, Harrisburg. Okay. Website, and I use my own mapping software and had it transfer the information. Okay. Wow, this whole neighborhood turns on. So one Saturday morning, I grabbed the morning, that's about a week and a half last summer. We parked the car, and we started talking. Of course, we know what doors you because we know where you live. Yeah. And we tried to find the landlords. None of the landlords live in the site, which is fine. Yeah. Whether they do or they don't. What I learned is, if they live on site, they might be less likely because that's their address. Yeah. So anyway, we had a lot of cards, a lot of flyers, and yet, anecdotally, some of those landlords are finding these guys jobs. That's fantastic. That's fabulous. We just can't figure out how to contact them. Yeah. Because we've got people. They're under the radar and how they want to. Yeah, the idea. I was doing the same thing in Harrisburg. So I monitor the offenders on a monthly basis. Okay. And I did that one zip code that incorporates one of the halfway houses. So I put in their numbers. So I quickly did a little satellite picture. Each corner house must have 5 or 6 separate units in it. And I just need to figure out how to get a hold of that. You know what you have rooms behind each other. So you can get, if you have a way of getting private landlords and real estate people in a room, I'll come to it. Super. Yeah. I don't want to go the route. I heard someplace out in maybe Iowa, where they found a almost bankrupt motel that was not inside any city limits. It's horrible. Yes, because that would be horrible. Your job. Right. Yes, you do have to. You do have to keep it convenient to mass transit, employment, health care, and all those things that we for granted every day. But the fact that the people we're trying to place are actually safer than a lot of people you don't know yet is something you should drive. Another thing to understand, Colorado did this. They deliberately set up houses where they would house in the community 5 to 7, 10 sex offenders. Okay. And what they found was they had fewer problems with sex offenders here than the other ones. I'm sure. Group homes for okay. Self-supported. Well, and what you're up against, now the parole board would disagree and they'll say, well, we don't want 2 at the same street address. We'll throw that away. And the will allow units in really crappy neighborhoods because they're less picky. Conventional wisdom includes stuff that everybody knows is outside. And the thing I heard that I didn't hear you mention was that, yes, sex offenders offend, but 92% of the time it's parole violations. Well, there's a whole lot. I mean, when we formed the subcommittee, and this predates my involvement, but it was the original subcommittee. It was a partnership between Joseph J. Peters Institute and prisons. Okay. Our roster is folks women organized against rape. Okay. We have our victim advocacy. We have some great victim advocacy. Yes, wonderful. We have treatment providers. We have academicians. Lawyers. We have former offenders. We have former offenders and survivors. Across the table. Okay, side by side. We convened a panel conference in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. In 2012, and sitting next to public defender /PCRU guy and the criminologist from Drexel University was the legal director of for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. And you know what was interesting? The state of so victim advocates, genuine victim advocates, needed genuine good advocates. Right now, you have more similar. It's not that we don't. We're not on sex offender sexual. We don't condone offense. We don't believe in coddling the offender, but there's a reason. If I could say one thing to this whole conference, is we need to take a public safety framework. Criminal justice is a piece of that, and anybody who uses the word system, then they ought to wash their mouth out with the system. Public safety gets safer when people re-enter faster. And to the extent that we discourage that, then we're harming public safety. The better that person gets, and my best friend, the former parolee, okay, drug dealer in Philly, got locked up, went back and forth as a parole violator for a DUI. They're in their 20s now. One will graduate from St. Joe's pre-med next year. Cool. The other's a heroin. You know what I mean? I hear These are human beings. These are people. And my friend now works for me. No skill, no experience, no nothing. Needed a job. Like make a bakery up in New York that has no employment application. Come here and work. I'm an independent. Okay. I'm a helper. And I make a living as electrical. Okay. So he knew enough about electricity to know what it's like. Now he runs cabling through industrial facilities. Okay. Learning a little bit about automation. Sure to learn. He's 43 years old. He's got to do something. But he's worked for 13 straight months. He's got money. Okay. Right there. So there you go. I'll pursue this thing of educating landlords and see if I can create something. You can get a gathering? Yeah. I'll be happy to take a lot. Thank you. Right.
I mean, yeah. So when she stepped back, I believe so. It's like we kind of like step down. Once you're like passion for like a year, he told me, so then they have your intern next year. I'm like, I would tell her. Ferguson, I know I'm going to put her. She's good. I told her that I'm not worried about it. When I get everything else going, it's going to be better. I know you just said it. You get to keep your titles, then you keep your watch. That word. Okay, the deal. So it's like sometimes I will leave those people.
That's my mom right there.
I know.
I'm so proud of her. I get emotional every time we like, I'm like, There was underneath it. Hi kids, where did you guys come from? The side?
I'm Anita Menstrual. You know, I think we met. I'm ready. The night that the mayor was there, I introduced my baby Bob. We met at, I thought I recognized you.
It's possible.
I'm married guy because I don't have to be.
A graduate down in It's not first grade, we're not going to be first. Would you say something? I love you.
But tell John to get okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
You're right. I know, right? You see me, right?
But I don't know where John Dyke's card is.
Go out there on there. I think I have your number.
Mom gave it to me already. That's the big deal.
You're not. I was surprised there. It's corrected. I couldn't get into the room. I will make that correction. They won't get wrong.
No, it was kind of like, yeah, James Newton didn't even.
Last night I want to get over there because I don't want to run out. Oh, you know what?
I'm always willing to speak at any type of event. I'm always willing to